Join us as we tell the stories of 5 extraordinary humans who faced nature's wildest beasts and lived to tell the tale. Sharks, leopards, hippos, and more, none of these animals stood a chance. From a diver escaping a great white to a farmer defeating a leopard barehanded, these are the ultimate stories of survival against impossible odds. In March 2005, St. James and LaDonna Davis were a couple defined by their passions, for each other, for adventure, and for a chimpanzee named Mo. But once filled with joy, their lives took an unimaginable turn on a fateful day in 2005. What followed was a stream of tragedy, loss, and betrayal that left scars far deeper than the physical ones St. James bore. St. James and LaDonna weren't ordinary people. They shared a passion for cars, with St. James being a professional boat racer turned NASCAR driver, and LaDonna, his crew chief, one of the first women to hold this position in the racing circuit. But more than anything, the couple loved their pet, or rather, the way they saw it, their son, a chimpanzee named Mo. Mo, an orphaned chimpanzee whose mother had been killed by poachers in Tanzania, came into the couple's life in 1967 when St. James decided to bring him home. Raised in their West Covina, California home, Mo dined at their table, wore clothes, and even participated in their wedding as a flower thrower and best man. The Davises didn't have any children. As such, Mo lived with them for over 3 decades, essentially becoming their son. But Mo's status as a domesticated wild animal came at a cost. In 1977, he bit a woman, and while the lawsuit was dismissed, it marked the beginning of a strained relationship with authorities. More incidents followed, including a dramatic escape in 1998, where Mo injured a police officer. These events culminated in 1999 when Mo bit a visitor's finger when, according to the Davises, he mistook her red nail polish for his favorite licorice. After this, the city forcibly removed Mo, relocating him to the Wildlife Way Station Sanctuary. The Davises fought for years to bring Mo home, but the chimpanzee remained at the sanctuary. Later, it was transferred to Animal Haven Ranch in Bakersfield, a non-profit organization that housed 6 primates. The couple visited frequently, bringing treats and sharing moments of joy that reminded them of the life they once shared under one roof. March 3, 2005 was supposed to be another joyous occasion for the family. That day, the Davises arrived at the ranch to celebrate Mo, who was turning 39. Laden with gifts, chocolate milk, and a raspberry-filled sheet cake, they were ready to shower their son with affection. But what began as a joyous reunion turned into a nightmare. While LaDonna prepared Mo's cake, she noticed another chimpanzee, Buddy, escaping its enclosure. Before she could react, Buddy attacked, biting off her thumb. St. James immediately shielded her, pushing her under the table, but the situation spiraled as a second chimpanzee, Ollie, joined the assault. Buddy and Ollie targeted St. James with ferocity. One chimpanzee mauled his face while the other attacked his lower body. The sanctuary's owner's son-in-law intervened, shooting Buddy. Meanwhile, Ollie managed to drag St. James and continue the attack, mauling the man. Soon after, Ollie was also shot, but not before the damage was done. St. James suffered horrifying injuries. He lost most of his face, including his nose, lips, and right eye, along with 8 fingers, a foot, parts of his torso, buttocks, and genitals. A paramedic later described the scene as resembling a grizzly bear attack. The aftermath was harrowing. St. James spent 6 months in the hospital, enduring more than 60 surgeries and a coma while battling relentless infections. He would never walk again, never see out of his right eye, and never fully regain the use of his hands. LaDonna became his full-time caretaker. Even more, the couple was uninsured, which meant they had to face mounting medical expenses. Still, they initially declined to sue the sanctuary. In 2009, however, they reversed course, filing a lawsuit and eventually settling for $4 million, funds that barely scratched the surface of their physical and emotional trauma. As for Mo, he mysteriously disappeared in 2008. Despite extensive searches involving helicopters and tracking teams, the chimpanzee who had been a central figure in their lives was never found. For the Davises, the grief was indescribable. St. James's health continued to decline. He suffered a stroke in 2017 and passed away from cardiopulmonary arrest the following year. His death marked the end of a storied life, but LaDonna's struggles were far from over. Alone and vulnerable, she fell prey to financial exploitation by Min Moore, a man the Davises had befriended and considered part of their family. Moore coerced her into signing over control of her assets, draining her accounts and leaving her destitute. To make matters worse, members of the Mongols Motorcycle Club took over her property, neglecting her care until authorities intervened. She was eventually placed in a care facility after a court-appointed fiduciary sold her remaining properties to cover her expenses. A legal settlement with Moore returned only a fraction of her stolen assets, leaving many to question the justice system's ability to protect the elderly. The story of St. James, LaDonna, and Moe profoundly reflects love, loss, and the fragility of human-animal connections. It was 2 days before Christmas, on December 23, 2021, a day that was supposed to be routine for Jacqueline Durand. Jacqueline, a University of Texas at Dallas student passionate about animals, was an experienced dog sitter. At 21, she loved her job, viewing it not as work, but as a way to nurture her lifelong bond with dogs. But that day, in the quiet suburb of Coppell, Texas, a dog-sitting job turned into a catastrophic nightmare for the student, one that would forever change her life. Jacqueline had agreed to care for Lucy, a German Shepherd mix, and Bender, a pit bull mix owned by Dr. Justin Bishop and his wife Ashley. Jacqueline had previously met the dogs and had decided they were well-behaved, describing them as seemingly lovely dogs. The Bishops assured her that the dogs would be crated upon her arrival. However, only minutes before arriving at the Bishop's house, the young woman received a text telling them the dogs were uncrated. When Jacqueline unlocked their front door, the dogs were roaming freely. Without warning, they attacked her. The German Shepherd and Pit Bull mix attacked her. The chaos erupted instantly. The dogs pounced on Jacqueline, dragging her from the doorway into the living room. Pinning her down, they began a furious assault. The attack was relentless. Lucy and Bender tore at her face, ripping off her nose, ears, lips, and cheeks down to the bone. They tore off her clothing, including her jeans, leaving her exposed and bleeding profusely. Jacqueline could feel the skin hanging off her face. In that terrifying moment, the young woman was convinced she was going to die. But Jacqueline's entrance and the subsequent attack triggered the home's security alarm, alerting authorities. Responding officers arrived to find the scene too dangerous to approach. Bodycam footage later revealed their struggle to control the dogs, who aggressively kept them at bay. For 37 agonizing minutes, Jacqueline lay defenseless and critically injured, screaming for help, while first responders attempted to secure the scene.
Are you the only one inside? Is the big dog right next to you?
It was only when the dogs were contained that medics were able to reach her. By the time Jacqueline was rushed to Medical City Plano Hospital, she had lost nearly 30% of her blood. Her injuries were catastrophic. Her face, ears, and portions of her scalp were gone. On the trauma table, she had to be resuscitated multiple times before being placed in a medically induced coma. Surgeons worked for 7 hours to stabilize her, beginning the long, grueling process of reconstruction. For 60 days in the hospital, she endured 17 surgeries, many of them reconstructive. Skin grafts from her buttocks and forehead were used to rebuild her face, while additional procedures utilized tissue from her hairline and thigh to reconstruct her nose and lips. The recovery process was excruciating, including intensive physical therapy to stretch her mouth by millimeters at a time so she could eat again. Jacqueline's road to recovery was not only physical but emotional. Despite the ordeal, she decided to reclaim her identity and speak out. In an interview, she revealed her reconstructed face, declaring that it was time to show who she was and that she could no longer live in fear of being seen. Jacqueline's story became a rallying cry for dog ownership and safety awareness, urging owners to understand their pets' behaviors and communicate effectively with caregivers. Her parents, John and Shirley Durand, remained steadfast in their support, though they expressed frustration over the attack's preventable nature. A warning sign on the Bishop's front door read, "Crazy dogs, please don't knock or ring the bell, call or text instead." For Jacqueline's family, this sign symbolized the owner's knowledge of their dog's aggressive tendencies, a negligence they argued led directly to her suffering. Jacqueline filed a lawsuit against the Bishops, seeking over $1 million in damages. The suit alleged that the couple failed to control, secure, and train their dogs, creating an unsafe environment for visitors. The Bishops expressed their heartbreak and devastation over the incident, but refrained from further comment due to pending litigation. Both dogs were euthanized after the attack. Through the darkness of her recovery, Jacqueline found light in the unwavering support of her boyfriend Nathan. Having recently survived cancer himself, Nathan stood by her side, offering the same love and care Jacqueline had shown him during his illness. Remarkably, Jacqueline's love for animals endured. Despite the trauma, she desired to work with dogs in the future, perhaps as a trainer. Her dogs brought her comfort during her recovery. But Jacqueline's story is far from over. She faces countless surgeries and years of therapy, but she refuses to be defined by the attack. On March 9, 1996, Paul Templar was a 28-year-old safari guide living his dream in Zimbabwe. After a stint in the British Army, Paul began leading photographic safaris along the Zambezi River. Certified through Zimbabwe's rigorous guide program, Paul loved showcasing the country's awe-inspiring wildlife to visitors. Life was idyllic, until it wasn't. That fateful day, Paul agreed to substitute for a friend who had fallen ill with malaria, leading a canoe safari down a stretch of the Zambezi he knew like the back of his hand. The expedition included 6 tourists, 4 Air France crew members and a German couple, and 3 apprentice guides. Paul Templar, in his canoe, took point. As the group navigated the river, they encountered a pod of hippos, a common but potentially dangerous sight in the area. Paul took precautions, steering the group to avoid the territorial animals. But then, disaster struck. One canoe fell behind, drifting off course. A loud thud followed as the back of the canoe was catapulted into the air, throwing its guide Evans into the water. Paul acted immediately, directing another guide to ensure the client's safety. At the same time, he paddled toward Evans, who was being swept toward a female hippo and her calf, an especially dangerous situation. As Paul neared Evans, a torpedo-like wave surged toward him. Recognizing the imminent threat, Paul slapped the water with his paddle, temporarily halting the creature's advance. He reached out for Evans, their fingers almost touching when the river erupted. In an instant, Paul's world went dark. At first, he had no idea what was happening. He could tell that his legs were in the water, wet and submerged. As for the upper part of his body, the sensation was different. It didn't feel dry or wet. He realized, to his horror, that he was up to his waist inside a hippo's throat. The massive animal, a territorial male, had attacked. Hippos are among Africa's most dangerous animals, capable of killing with alarming efficiency. Growing up to 16 feet long and weighing as much as 4.5 tons, they possess jaws that can open 150 degrees and sharp canines up to 20 inches long. Their bite, 3 times stronger than a lion's, can crush bones or tear apart prey. The hippo, uncomfortable with its human captive, spat Paul out. Gasping for air, the man surfaced and found Evans. But before he could secure the guide, the hippo struck again, pulling Paul back into its jaws. This time, his legs were trapped while his hands remained free. Thrashed violently, Paul clung to the creature's tusks in a desperate bid to avoid being torn apart. The attack lasted a harrowing 3.5 minutes. When the hippo finally released him, Paul Templar was critically injured. Apprentice guide Mac, showing remarkable bravery, paddled close enough for Paul to grab the kayak's handle. Mac pulled him to the safety of a nearby rock. Evans, however, was gone. His body was later discovered downstream, the victim of drowning. Paul's injuries were devastating. His left foot was shattered, one arm crushed and a lung punctured. Blood bubbled from his mouth as his guide struggled to stabilize him. Using saran wrap from a snack plate, they improvised a bandage for a gaping wound in his back. The group decided to risk paddling to shore despite the ever-present threat of the hippo. The animal bumped their canoe on the way, but they eventually reached the riverbank. The 8-hour drive to the nearest hospital tested Paul's endurance. Upon arrival, surgeons doubted he would survive. Over the next month, he underwent multiple major surgeries. While they managed to save his legs and one arm, his left arm had to be amputated. Waking in the ICU to find his arm gone, Paul was devastated. Yet he was relieved to have his legs and right arm still, a foundation to rebuild his life. Paul's recovery included intensive physical and occupational therapy in Zimbabwe and the United Kingdom. He later received a prosthetic arm, allowing him to regain independence. The psychological journey was as grueling as the physical one, with emotions ranging from despair to gratitude. 2 years after the attack, Paul Templar reclaimed the Zambezi River, joining a team to complete the longest recorded descent of its waters, a 600-mile journey over 3 months. He refused to let the attack define him, focusing on what was possible rather than what he had lost. His surgeon's words became his mantra, "You're the sum of your choices." He wrote a memoir, What's Left of Me, and became a motivational speaker, inspiring others with his story of survival and resilience. He later moved to the United States, married, and built a life for himself. In January 2007, Eric Nerhus was a 41-year-old professional abalone diver. He had spent years navigating the dangerous waters of the southern coast of New South Wales, Australia, harvesting the prized mollusk. His work was inherently unsafe, but nothing could have prepared him for the life-and-death encounter he faced on a January morning. That day began like many others. Eric was diving off Cape Howe in murky 26-foot deep waters, accompanied by his 16-year-old son Mark, who remained on the boat. Though the conditions were rough and recent shark sightings had been reported, Eric decided to proceed. The peaceful morning became a nightmare as he combed the seabed for abalone. Without warning, an incredible beast, a 10-foot great white shark, surged from the murky depths and clamped its powerful jaws around Eric's head and shoulders. The initial bite crushed his diving mask and broke his nose, plunging him into darkness. Trapped headfirst inside the predator's mouth, with its jagged teeth digging into his torso, Eric was unable to move. The bite's pressure was immense, his body crushed as if between two colliding trucks. The shark attempted to push him further into its throat, but Eric's lead-lined weight vest, designed to aid buoyancy during dives, absorbed much of the bite's force, preventing its teeth from piercing his chest and heart. Eric's survival instincts kicked in as the great white began to shake him violently. Fighting to stay alive, he felt for the shark's eye socket and gouged it with his fingers. Reacting to the pain, the shark briefly released him, but not before its teeth sank into the back of his head. Freed momentarily, Eric scrambled to reinsert his air regulator and began a cautious ascent. However, the ordeal wasn't over. The shark, unwilling to give up its prey, circled him ominously, its massive black eye fixed on him. Bleeding heavily, Eric remained calm, spreading his limbs to signal he was not a seal. Slowly, he ascended toward the surface, the shark brushing against his flippers as it pursued him. Breaking through the water's surface, Eric was pulled onto the boat by his son Mark. Blood poured from deep wounds on his head, chest, and back. Despite his critical condition, emergency responders acted swiftly. A rescue helicopter airlifted him to Wollongong Hospital, where doctors described his survival as miraculous. Eric Nerhus suffered extensive injuries, a broken nose, lacerations across his torso, and puncture wounds from the shark's teeth. He required 75 stitches to close the wounds, but his lead vest had spared him from certain death. Reflecting on his ordeal, the man expressed gratitude for his survival, attributing it to luck and his determination to fight back. Although the experience left scars both physically and emotionally, Eric recognized the attack as a rare and unfortunate case of mistaken identity, with the shark likely mistaking him for a seal. In the quiet village of Kihato near Mount Kenya, a day that began like any other for 73-year-old Daniel Mumburugu turned into a harrowing battle for survival. Daniel, a farmer, tended to his potato and bean crops when he encountered a predator that would test every ounce of his courage. As Daniel worked in his fields, an aggressive leopard, concealed in the tall grass, lunged at him with a blood-curdling snarl that silenced the natural hum of the countryside. The sudden attack gave Daniel seconds to react before the animal was upon him. Armed with a machete in one hand, he faced the predator head-on. However, in intense clarity, Daniel dropped the weapon and thrust his hand into the leopard's gaping mouth. The leopard's powerful jaws clamped onto his wrist, its teeth sinking deep into his flesh. Its claws raked his body as the animal thrashed, determined to overpower him. Despite the excruciating pain, Daniel fought back with a determination fueled by survival instinct. His hand, now deep in the predator's mouth, felt for its tongue. With all his strength, he gripped it and began to pull, cutting off the animal's ability to breathe. As the leopard's breathing became labored, Daniel's grip tightened. The predator's ferocity waned as it succumbed to the loss of air. The leopard released a dying snarl in its final moments, leaving Daniel bloodied but victorious. A neighbor, alerted by the commotion, arrived and delivered the final blow to the leopard with a machete. Yet against all odds, he had survived one of nature's deadliest predators. Villagers quickly rallied around him, transporting him to a local hospital, where authorities, astonished by his ordeal, ensured he received free treatment. Experts from the Kenya Wildlife Service, KWS, later confirmed that the leopard likely attacked due to injuries sustained elsewhere, a condition that often drives wild animals into unprovoked aggression. KWS officials marveled at Daniel's survival, acknowledging his extraordinary courage and quick thinking. In his village, Daniel was celebrated as a hero.